If you have your Bibles, if you would, turn to Genesis chapter 41. That's where we're going to be tonight as we continue to walk through the story of Joseph, a very interesting character to say the least. And when we last left him, he had found himself serving out a sentence for a crime he did not commit, and he was in a place where the sun never shines. It was a place for the king's prisoners. In chapter 41, verse 1, tells us that sadly he had actually spent 2 entire years there doing hard time. And it was after those 2 years that he experienced yet another turning point in his life. And it was for Joseph something that no doubt started out as an ordinary day. He had probably woken up just like he always did, but there was this one little matter of which Joseph woke up that morning knowing nothing about, and that was Pharaoh had had a bizarre dream, a disturbing dream. Have you ever had a really vivid, disturbing dream before? Some of you have had those dreams before where someone does something in your life and you don't like it, and then you're mad at that person when you wake up. Has that ever happened to you? You wake up and your spouse tells you, "You were so mean to me last night," and you're like, "I was dead asleep." "I know, in my dream." That's never happened to me before, never once. But the king has this disturbing dream. Dreams can be disturbing, and especially there are certain dreams we have that really, they stick with us, like you can't shake it. And I think that was kind of how it was for Pharaoh. And in this dream, he sees these 7 very fat, sleek cattle, and they're coming up out of the Delta Nile River. And then he sees these 7 gauntly cattle, and they're coming up out of that same river, and they devour those same sleek cattle. And he wakes up, and he kind of figures out, probably had something before I went to bed, that was really weird. Wasn't setting too well on him. And then verses 5 through 7, again, we're in Genesis 41. I'm not reading this section yet. I'm kind of paraphrasing it. It tells us that when Pharaoh fell back asleep, he dreamed basically the very same dream again, only this time instead of cows, it was these ears of corn. And then verse 8 says, in the morning his spirit was troubled. So again, that's the part of the story where you realize, he was really bothered by this, and it was kind of sticking with him and wanted to know what's going on. So what the text says is, he called for his wise guys, the wise people in the court, to come and interpret the dream for him. And they come and they all do one of these numbers. They're like, "I don't know. That does sound really weird. Those are some weird dreams, but I have no idea what they actually mean." And there's a guy standing there, and he's like, wait a second. Remember the guy from last week? He was like, "How could I ever forget you? Of course I will remember you." It's that guy. That guy who had forgot about him for 2 years is like, wait a second, I remember there was a guy that could interpret dreams. And so he finally speaks up after all of that time, and he gives this testimony. You can read verses 9 through 13 in Genesis 41 of his testimony about this Hebrew guy he meets in prison, accurately interprets his dream, and all of that. Verse 14 says that this was all Pharaoh needed to hear, and very likely in less than an hour, you have Joseph being transported from his dungeon position literally into the palace, talking with this Pharaoh king. And you can kind of imagine that scene from Joseph's perspective, like you get shaved for the first time probably in maybe 2 years. You got this giant beard, and they're going to shave that off, and they're bathing you, slapping some water on you. They probably give you these clothes that, again, you probably haven't had new clothes in this entire time. This is all very strange. And, you are striding into this place of power, and you're looking around, at the palace, and you're like, this is a weird day. And in verse 15, it says that Pharaoh addresses the prisoner, and he explains to him, "I've had a baffling dream. I've heard reports that you can explain it." And this is kind of his moment of golden opportunity, where if I'm Joseph, I know I've done this a couple times in this series. If I'm Joseph, here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to be like, "Yes, I know how to interpret your dream. And by the way, had that dummy standing right over there not forgotten about me, I could have been here a lot sooner, and I could have been helping you." That's what he does not say. How does he handle it? Much differently than Inlow would handle it. Verse 16, I'm going to finally read the text, and here it is. I cannot do it. I can't do it. He said, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. What an unbelievably humble thing to say. I cannot do this, but I serve a God who can interpret dreams. I serve a God who will tell you the meaning of dreams. And you kind of just wonder, how does Joseph get to this place of humility in his life where he can be this humble? And I think part of it is his heart has been broken so much. Part of it is he's gone through the terrible things that he's gone through. And I think part of that too is like that character that Joseph had, it had been galvanized through those hard times. And sometimes that's what hard times do. They reveal that character that's inside of us. And in this case, it revealed a very humble character. His external circumstances probably seemed almost unbearable, but inside they turned him into gold. All right, let's look at the text. Look at verse 25. He says, you've told me about two dreams. And really, you've told me the same dream. They mean the same thing. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are also 7 years. Again, it's one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterwards are also 7 years. And the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind, those are 7 years. The 7 good stalks, those are good years. The 7 bad stalks are bad famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh, God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. And the abundance in the land will not be remembered because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. Now, again, this is a very impressive interpretation. First of all, it's kind of bold, too, to be like, so this is exactly what it means. And in fact, you told me you had 2 dreams. Let me tell you, you actually only had 1 dream. And let me tell you exactly what those dreams were, and let me tell you what those dreams meant. And then he says this in verse 33. I love this. He says, now, let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Now, this sounds like something I might say. But I would probably say it a little bit differently than he said it. I'd probably be like, yeah, and he probably should be about 6'2", green eyes, some a guy like this, right? And again, there's nothing in the text to indicate that he's trying to hedge his position. He's not offering his resume. He's not dropping hints. And I get the sense again of Joseph that even in this moment, after having been through everything he's been through, he's like, if God's going to make it happen, he's going to make it happen. I don't need to put my thumb on the scale for God. Like, God will take care of what he needs to take care of in the situation. If it's me, great, but I don't need to do that. And I truly believe this is one of those living embodiments in Scripture of what James teaches us in the New Testament, chapter 4, verse 10. Humble yourself, and the Lord will lift you up. As we go low, as we humble ourselves, God's going to take care of everything else. Which is not, again, it's not my instinct. I don't know if it's your instinct. That's not my instinct is I gotta get mine. I gotta fight for me. I gotta take care of myself. I gotta maneuver. And Joseph's like, God's got this. And as a result, look what ends up happening. Chapter 41 shows you what happens when you humble yourself. Look at verse 39. Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. This is Pharaoh to Joseph. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all of my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. And so, obviously, what Pharaoh sees is right to the heart of Joseph. That galvanization that happened, that heart of gold, that's what he sees. He sees this man before me as a trustworthy man, and he had withstood a tremendous amount of pressure, and he had been refined into gold through that. And then I can kind of picture I mean, Pharaoh's got to be a dramatic guy, right? Like, I can picture him, like, sweeping his arm out and saying the next part where he's like, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt, he says. And then Pharaoh took his signet ring. Again, he's a dramatic guy, right? Like, we got to have a symbol in all this. And he put it on Joseph's finger. And he dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command. And people shouted before him, bow down. And thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. This dude was in a dungeon like 40 verses ago. And now he is got a signet ring on his finger. By the way, do you know what that means? You know what the signet ring is? The signet ring is the platinum charge card. That's like, I'm sorry, what now? I don't know if you saw this, but I'm wearing this. It was the authority. He could charge with it. It was how you stamped invoices. It's how you made laws. It was your authority to validate or verify. It was your seal. And now I've got it on my finger. And by the way, guess who put it there? Pharaoh himself literally is the one that put it there. And I have the authority of the king's imprint. And again, I got to wonder what he's thinking in this moment. Like, I wonder if he's reflecting back on, like, all the years that have gone before. Like, you know, we've just been doing this for what? We're in what, week 4 or week 5 of this, something like that? You know, this is like year 30 for him in trials. And I just wonder, like, was he thinking back through that thing? Like, is he thinking back to his well-meaning father? Like, when Pharaoh puts a robe around him, does he have a flashback to when his dad put that brightly colored robe around him? When he sees the gold chain, does it give him flashbacks of the gold chain that Potiphar's wife wore? Does he think about his scheming brothers, where he's like, man, they never could have imagined me as a ruler. I told them, though. I told them. Does he forget about, or does he think about the forgetful cupbearer? You know, that's me. You give me power in Pharaoh's court. I'm like, hey, could you bring that cupbearer back, by the way? I got a thing or two to say to him. But one thing I need to hear, and maybe you do too, is can we just let God take care of the cupbearers in our lives? Let God sort those people out. The people who forget you, the people who abandon you, the people who make promises to you and break those promises, the people who take from you and they don't give back. It is God's job to deal with the cupbearers in your past. That's His job. What is your job? Your job is to remain faithful. It's just to be faithful to a God who won't forget you. He's not the cupbearer. He's a different entity altogether. God will not leave you. He will not forsake you. It's not to say that our lives will be easy. It's not to say we won't go through some suffering, but it's to say He will never, ever leave us in that state. He is with us always, never going to leave us. So Joseph's got the ring of the king. He's got the new nice robe. He's got the gold chain. He's got the chariot. I'm sure he's got some nice rims on the chariot, right? And everywhere he goes, this bonus fact, did you see this? Everywhere he goes, there's people like, bow down, Joseph's coming. And now everyone who sees him has to bow down before him. And you think about like that broken and contrite heart that Joseph must have had in the pit of the dungeon. And now you have people bowing down before him. He was so bruised and crushed by the blows of disappointment, all these unrealized dreams, and God had never left his side. He had been afflicted, but all of it was a refining, and he came out gold, and he had been a person of greater stability and deeper quality and stronger character. And God's promises for us are just as powerful as they were for Joseph. And God's tender mercies accompany us from the pit to the palaces of promise that He puts us. I do have a problem with this, though. This image of Joseph. Because here's my thinking. What if, like, Because we've seen him go through this, right? We've seen him when he was in the fields with his brothers and being like, y'all are going to bow down to me. And then we've seen his brothers kick him and throw him in a pit and then be like, on second thought, let's get some money out of him. Sell him into slavery. We've seen him in Potiphar's household, rise to success. We've seen Potiphar's wife remove all that success in one fell sweep. We've seen him be falsely accused. We've seen all of that. But what if this is the first time you lay eyes on old Joe? What if you're just a person in Egypt and you see old Joe rolling up? You have no concept of all the stuff he's been through. And your perspective is a guy who's working out in the field and, you're breaking your back, moving those giant stones to build that stupid pyramid. And you know nothing about the dungeon. All you see is the throne room. That's all you see. And all you know is some upstart foreigner has moved his way and found his way into the good graces of Pharaoh, and now you've got somebody yelling at you to bow your knee to him. And you're like, who does this guy think he is? Who did this guy bribe? What lottery did this guy win? He's got to know somebody. That's the way it is over there in the court. And here's the thing. The reason I know is because any of us in the same situation, if this is the first moment we lay our eyes on Joseph, we're thinking the very same thing. But what we can't see, what he couldn't see, is what God had been doing on the inside all along. He has no concept of what else had happened in Joseph's life. He doesn't know about the dungeon. He doesn't know about Joseph's faithfulness. He doesn't know about how Joseph did the right thing. When no one else was around, he did the right thing. And it cost him dearly. Doesn't know any of that. What he doesn't know is this. Joseph had been broken. Badly, badly broken. Before he got the robe and the signet ring and the chariot and the chain, he had been so broken. And the truth of the matter is, we acknowledge God uses broken things, right? What did Jesus say? That once a seed dies, it can't bring life, right? We know that broken soil produces a crop, and broken clouds produce rain, and broken grain gives bread, and broken bread gives strength. And I want to say this, if there is someone you admire spiritually, someone that you look at and you're like, I wish I could be like that person spiritually. You admire what the Lord is doing in their life. Someone that you look up to. Someone that astonishes you. Someone that inspires you. This is what I want to tell you. You may not have seen it, but at some point, God broke that person. I promise you that God has broken them. You don't know that part of the story. But Joseph he's been appointed, he's been chosen, he's been prepared, he's been selected, he's been refined. And all that was being done by God. And that's how he has come to wear the ring. And that's how he has come to have the robe and the necklace and the chariot. And that's why somebody is saying, bow the knee. It's because God ultimately is the one that put the words in that person's mouth. Joseph himself, by the way, he's not saying that. He's not the one saying, bow down. It's some other bozo yelling that out. Let's look at the end of this chapter, verse 46. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. And during the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt, and he stored it in the cities. In each city he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. And he stored up huge quantities of grain like the sea of the sand. It was so much, I love this verse, it was so much they literally stopped keeping track. They were like, this is a lot, that's all we need to know. Verse 50, before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, and he said, it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. The second son he named Ephraim and said, it's because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. I don't have time really to do a dive into those names. They're very meaningfully rich names. But the truth is that God had guided Joseph, and he, in a way, guides us in getting to read this story. And we can kind of sum up this whole thing to know his heart was humble before God the entire time. And those memories were no doubt there. They were lodged deep in the crevices beneath his cranium. But when relief finally came, God had made him forget the pain and the anguish that had happened. And God had used humble Joe, because humble Joe did something we must learn to do. Joe had used gratitude to drive out the pride in his life. Use gratitude to drive out pride. It's God who's going to bring you through the dungeon. It's God who's going to reward your faithfulness. So when it comes, don't pat yourself on the back. Be grateful, not proud. Be grateful, not proud. It's easier said than done, because then once I've been through the dungeon and I've been thrown in the pit and all that, I want to say, hey, I made it. Look at me. I made it. I did this. And Joseph didn't do that. Instead, he leaned into the gratitude that he had for what God had done. He's very grateful, and he's not being proud. It's very tempting to try to get revenge. Like, I got the Reubens in my life that I'm thinking about, and I got the Judas and the Dans and the Mrs. Potiphar's of the past, and that cupbearer. I've got some cupbearers. And it is very tempting to try to get back at those who have stung us and stripped us and hurt us. And instead, what we have to do is we have to give birth to Manasseh. He named his firstborn Manasseh because God made me forget all my trouble. Forget the pain of the past.
Let's stand. Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it. Redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed through his infinite mercy. His child and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed, redeemed, his child and forever I am. Redeemed and so happy in Jesus, no language my rapture can tell. I know that the light of his presence with me doth continually dwell. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed, redeemed, his child and forever I am. I know I shall see in his beauty the King in whose law I delight, who lovingly guardeth my footsteps and giveth me songs in the night. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed, redeemed, his child and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed, redeemed, his child and forever I am. Please be seated.
All right, just a handful of reactions, but I really like them tonight. This one says, I remember having a dream where Superman crashed into my elementary and rescued me from school. I don't remember what grade I was in. I'm glad they added the detail, I don't remember what grade I was in, because that would be kind of weird if you had that dream like last week. So this one says, I bet Joseph never stopped to take pleasure in being elevated. Too much work to do. Too many people counting on you. Oh my goodness, that will preach. That will preach. You don't really even have time to enjoy the sweet ride because you're like, I got stuff I need to do. Wow, that's so good. This one says, another great message about Joseph. Accordingly, I need to let God take care of the cupbearers in my life. Me too. Many times I let my failure to do this impact my trust in God. I love the thought of gratitude to God driving our love back to him. Thank you. I appreciate your encouragement and those thoughts as well. Really good reactions tonight. I didn't say it, but I just would remind you as well that Commission Sundays on Sunday, that is our special contribution that we always take right about this time of year to fund all of our short-term mission works throughout the summer. I know that many of you have partnered with those in many different ways in the past. Certainly, we covet your prayers in our partnership with that. We certainly would invite you to open your heart about the possibility of joining one of those short-term mission works. I can't think of anything that I've ever done in my life that has made me pray more and read my Bible more and feel closer to God in such a short amount of time than short-term mission work. So if you can actually go and participate in one of those, that would be great. And then certainly, if those aren't free, we need financial support as well. So if you'll be in prayer about how you can financially support that, again, we'll have a contribution specifically for that on Sunday after our regular contribution. Also, again, be on the lookout for that April the 26th, signing up for hosting the Singing Youth of Denver. If you can be a part of that, let us know. And by the way, if you have any questions about that, Dean is really our sponsor for that. And so Dean can answer any specific questions you may have about that. Appreciate you being here tonight. Your reward is this clip of the week.
Lenny, look at me. Why are you crying?
Because I have to wear makeup.
Why do you have to wear makeup?
It's a makeup game.
No, babe, you missed. A game got rained out, so now we have to make it up.